Welcome to today's Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled for this one. We're going to shake things up a bit today and treat this session as an interactive applied psychology workshop. I want you to imagine you're sitting in a premier introductory psychology class right now. Our main objective today? To completely understand and ultimately overcome the crazy phenomenon of crowd apathy. By the time we wrap this up, I promise you're going to see group behavior in a completely different light.
Here's the syllabus for today's session. 1. The urban survival misfire. 2. The Kitty Genovese catalyst. 3. Pluralistic ignorance in action. 4. Ambiguity versus clear danger. And 5. Your intervention workshop. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. The urban survival misfire. Okay, let's dive into this by talking about that common, deeply terrifying feeling of helplessness.
You know the scenario, right? Someone collapses in a crowded room or out on a busy street and nobody moves. Everyone is just kind of frozen, waiting. So why does that happen? Well, to understand this, we need to establish an evolutionary baseline. Your 70,000-year-old brain simply wasn't built for a modern city sidewalk packed with thousands of anonymous strangers. It was actually built for an ancestral band of about 150 people. In that ancient environment, every single face was known, and duty was instantly shared and visible. If someone fell in a river, the closest or strongest person jumped in. There was zero anonymity. Today, when you're surrounded by strangers you're never going to see again, that ancient group responsibility heuristic doesn't just vanish. It completely misfires in all that sensory overload. Your brain automatically assumes someone else, someone better qualified, is already handling the emergency.
Moving on to Section 2, the Kitty Genovese catalyst.
This ancient misfire was really brought into the harsh spotlight of modern research by a specific tragedy, one that finally forced psychologists to look for a mechanical explanation of the human mind, rather than just throwing their hands up and blaming urban cruelty. If we look at the timeline, we can trace the research arc of this entire phenomenon. It kicks off in 1964 with the horrific attack on Kitty Genovese in New York City. Now, quick aside, while the initial media reports claiming dozens of neighbors watched and did absolutely nothing have since been heavily disputed and corrected, the public fury at the time was very real. And that fury catalyzed psychologists like Latané and Darley in the late 1960s to conduct their now classic lab experiments. Decades later, all of this culminated in a massive 2011 meta-analysis by Peter Fisher, which we're going to dig into in just a minute.
But first, what's incredibly fascinating is how Latané and Darley actually proved this core concept, which is known as diffusion of responsibility. It's the idea that the obligation to act gets divided among everyone present, shrinking down to basically nothing for any single individual. They set up this totally ingenious intercom experiment. They placed participants alone in a room, supposedly connected to others via an intercom system. Suddenly, one of the voices on the other end appeared to have a violent choking seizure. The twist? Some participants thought they were the only ones listening, while others thought a whole group was on the line. When they thought they were alone, almost everyone rushed out to help within seconds. But when they believed others were listening, they hesitated. The emergency itself didn't change at all. Only the perceived number of witnesses did. The personal obligation to act literally divided and shrank.
Section 3. Pluralistic ignorance in action.
So here's the catch. Diffusion of responsibility doesn't act alone. There's a second, equally powerful piece of evolutionary wiring tangled up in all this crowd hesitation. Your ancestors paid massive attention to what the rest of the tribe was doing. If a situation seemed a little off, but nobody else looked panicked, the safest bet was to assume there was no real danger. This mental shortcut is called SocialProof. In a crowd of calm strangers today, when something unusual happens, you instantly glance around, and if you see blank expressions, your ancient threat detection system quietly downgrades the emergency. It falsely tells you that everything is fine, simply because everyone else is also hiding their panic to look at you.
And this leads us directly to pluralistic ignorance. This was brilliantly captured in another classic psychological study, the smoke-filled room experiment. Researchers literally piped thick smoke into a room where participants were taking a test. When they were in there alone, people reported the smoke immediately, as you'd expect. But when researchers planted instructed actors in the room who just sat there calmly working, the real participants ignored a literal fire hazard. They recalibrated their own sense of danger completely downward, just to match the calm strangers sitting right beside them.
Let's actually test this in your own lives for a second. Think about a crowded dorm lounge, or maybe a really loud campus party. Have you ever seen someone who looked like they might be a little too intoxicated or maybe in some kind of trouble? And before acting, you paused to see if anyone else was stepping in? You waited to see if they were actually in danger or just having a good time, right? Well, that is pluralistic ignorance happening to you in real time.
Section 4. Ambiguity versus clear danger.
Let's see how this all builds together by looking at a massive breakthrough twist uncovered by Peter Fisher's 2011 meta-analysis. He reviewed 50 years of data on this exact behavior, and he discovered something profoundly important that shifts this from a somewhat depressing lecture into a really empowering one. In highly ambiguous situations, hesitation is extremely high. We rely heavily on that social proof we just talked about. But when a threat is undeniably dangerous and physically threatening to the bystanders themselves, the hesitation actually shrinks. The clear and present danger completely overrides the social hesitation. This is huge because it proves that the bystander effect isn't about human cowardice or modern apathy. It's about ambiguity. Clarity cuts straight through the diffusion. And this table brilliantly illustrates how the failure isn't in the human heart at all, but in the signal itself. Look at how this changes across daily environments. At a chaotic frat party, ambiguity is incredibly high, so the diffusion of responsibility is also high. On a crowded subway where someone is maybe slumped over in a seat, ambiguity is medium, but anonymity keeps that diffusion really high. But if you introduce a direct physical threat, say a clear and violent attack, or a sudden structural collapse, ambiguity drops to low, and responsibility diffusion completely collapses along with it. People actually do jump into action.
Section 5, Your Intervention Workshop.
Now that we've diagnosed the actual mechanics of why our brains freeze up in crowds, let's turn this class into a literal training sequence. I want to teach you the counterspell. Modern training has actually learned from these psychological traps. The passive failure of that smokeroom experiment relied entirely on unchecked ambiguity. But in the real world today, workplace safety and disaster survival guides actively warn against simply shouting "help" to a crowd or just assuming someone else has called 911. Instead, they teach active, direct instruction.
So the biggest takeaway for you as a student of psychology today is this. The fix isn't moral, it's mechanical. Your instincts are not broken, they are just misfiring in a modern environment. If diffusion of responsibility thrives on vagueness and ambiguity, then we have to deliberately, systematically remove that vagueness.
So, here is your practical workshop toolkit to switch that tribal logic of accountable duty right back on. Step 1, point at a specific person. Step 2, strip away the ambiguity by naming them out loud, or if they're a total stranger, describing them precisely. Step 3, assign a direct, concrete task. Please don't just yell, "Somebody call for help." Look directly at someone and say, "You, in the blue jacket, call an ambulance right now." The absolute second that responsibility lands on one identifiable person, the diffusion collapses. You have instantly recreated the accountability of that ancient 150-person tribe.
As we wrap up this session, I want to leave you with a thought. The next time you're standing in a crowded room and someone clearly needs help, you're going to see people scanning those calm faces around them, totally trapped in pluralistic ignorance. But you now understand the tribal math happening underneath that pause. You know it isn't apathy. It's an ancient system waiting for a signal. Knowing this, you literally have the power to break the spell. Will you be the one who points, speaks up, and provides the exact clarity needed to make the crowd move?